Welcome back to PJ Takes 5. Today is Tuesday, August 19th, and the first wave of NFL trade season is officially here. But we start the show by looking at the Chicago Bears' 38-0 win over the Buffalo Bills to cap off the Sunday of the second week of NFL preseason. The big topic of conversation was seeing Caleb Williams in the first-team offense for the first time under Ben Johnson. The group sat out last weekend against the Miami Dolphins and made their debut. Week 2, the early results were very promising. First drive of the game, get the ball at the 8-yard line, march down for a 92-yard touchdown drive in which Caleb had 5 completions on 6 attempts, 97 yards and a touchdown, a 36-yard catch and run by Olamide Zaccheaus. Second drive was not quite as successful, just 1 for 4 for 10 yards. Had that third down drop to Roma Dunze, which I know Caleb said in his post-game presser that he could have done a little better job on to get the ball and rhythm to him. But overall, a really strong showing from the group early on, even without a couple starters. Joe Thuney didn't play at left guard. They had Luke Newman in. But like I said, really promising start early on. Obviously, with it being the preseason, we're not going to see a lot of complicated looks out of the offense. And even not in the preseason, this is a playbook that's going to get deeper and more complicated as we go throughout the season here. So week 1's not going to look the same as week 18 as they add more layers of complexity to the offense there. But, and just the base sets, base personnel, 12 personnel, really simple passing concepts. The offense looked really strong and really in good rhythm. A couple big Caleb Williams takeaways. Just seemed super comfortable in the scheme. They got him both throwing from in the pocket, throwing from out on the perimeter, on the right there. Seeing some of that ability to play point guard, but also create plays in his own right. They have so many good offensive playmakers. 4 different receivers between DJ Moore, Odunze, Luther Burden, Zaccheaus, and then both the tight ends, Colston Loveland, Cole Kmet, who both played a lot early. There's so many great options to get the ball to in space, let them make plays. You don't have to rely on making a big play every single time you're throwing the ball. I think that's going to be a really big change from last season, even though they had some good playmakers. The scheme is much more quarterback friendly, and I think we're going to see that develop here, getting guys in space with the ball in their hands. Like I said, I saw a lot of 2 tight end sets early with drafting Loveland in the top 10. That's something that we thought we were going to see. Cole Kmet's a great tight end, and he's not going to lose his spot, but Loveland's going to become that real versatile piece that can move inside, outside, can block, can go on chip blocks and then go out in space, can come across the formation, can shift out from end of the line to the slot, can shift from out in the boundary and go for jump balls, can go on the boundary back in the tight end. There's just a lot of different chess piece moves you can make with Loveland, and we saw a little bit of that on Sunday. Not the full playbook, so it wasn't everything that we're going to see out of him, but just a little bit of that idea of getting him into space against slower linebackers or smaller DBs. That's going to be a big part of the offense moving forward here. And one of the bigger unsung things about the offense, no sacks with Caleb at quarterback. That's partly because they got the ball out so fast. That's partly because of the improvements across the offensive line. That left tackle competition is still working itself out. It seems like Braxton Jones, the incumbent left tackle, has won that position again. But really across that interior, Joe Thuney didn't play, but Drew Dahlman and Jonah Jackson, definitely a big step up from what they had at their disposal last year at this time. So to see him not get a lot of pressure and work from a clean pocket was definitely a sight for sore eyes, and something that we just didn't see a lot of last year, and contributed a lot to some of the offensive problems they had. And like I said, the offense wasn't even at full force. We had Newman in for Thuney. The running back situation was a little messed up. Swift is out. Roshan Johnson remains out. Kyle Monangai missed the game. So they had Deion Hankins in there for a good portion of the first team reps, and he played pretty well given his opportunities. But overall, just a really strong performance from the starting offense, and the playbook's only become more creative. So just very, 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 very promising look early on. A couple other Bears that look pretty good. The backup running back situation, Ian Wheeler and Britton Brown, who they signed in recent weeks to help with some of the injuries across the running back group. They had a really great game, combined for 35 carries, 153 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So a little less than 4.4 yards per carry, but a lot of good power running in between the tackles against backup defensive units. That tune, Luther Burden, he finished the game receiving with 3 catches for 49 yards, but was great in short run block situations. We saw a lot of those highlights on the broadcast with Greg Olsen pointing them out more and more, but when they got to the goal line, motioning him to crack a safety to open up a run lane really helped out a lot, and enforcing that Ben Johnson idea of no block, no rock, which I know a lot of coaches possess, but that seems to be something that's been really imprinted on this team, especially the younger players, that you got to be able to run block, you got to be able to pass block out the backfield if you want to see some offensive production. And for Burden, who was a player coming out of Missouri with a couple character concerns, to see him dedicate to that philosophy and be okay with impacting the offense without the ball in his hand was very promising. They're kind of logjammed with 4 really good receivers. Zaccheaus seems to be a really good slot receiver, and we know what DJ Moore and Roma Dunze are capable of, but Burden's going to get in there. He's going to have his shots, and he's really earning the respect of the coaching staff, it seems. Backup quarterback Tyson Bagent played really well, 13 for 22, 196 yards and a touchdown. Had a great couple plays where he manipulated the defense. I know he rolled out, faced some pressure, got the linebacker to bite, and then hit him over the top with a little dink. Really showing that veteran processing of the offense. Hopefully he's a player that you don't see a lot of this year, because that would probably mean that Caleb Williams gets hurt in some capacity, but a player that if something happens and he has to start 2, 3, 4, 5 games, you're probably not too worried about that. And a player that if another team has a quarterback issue and you feel comfortable with Case Keenum maybe in the quarterback room, it's somebody that you can trade out and get another asset to build this team forward, because frankly he's probably not going to be the long-term backup, just because his ceiling is a little bit higher than that, and he could maybe be a player who goes in and competes for another starting job elsewhere. On the defensive side of the ball, Austin Booker had another sack. He left the game early with a knee injury, but he's now upped his total preseason number to 4 sacks over 2 games. So just exceptional production out of the player, albeit against backups, but we're seeing him reach those next steps. Super young player. Redshirted a little bit last year just because he's so young and so raw that he needed to build up a little bit and work on his technique, but the dividends seem to be paying off, and he's going to be a player who probably isn't going to start over Dio Odeyingbo week 1, but is a player who could definitely see some pass rush rotation later in the season and could eventually become a starting defensive end opposite of Montez Sweat. And then from the coaching staff, we saw both Al Harris and Declan Doyle call plays for the defense and offense respectively. Al Harris, a DB coach that they brought over from the Cowboys, and Doyle, a Sean Payton protege that is now the offensive coordinator, just 28 years old. Getting those guys you don't normally call plays, starting to grip some plays on offense and defense is certainly not a rare thing to see in the preseason, but it was a good sign that they were able to bring those guys in and run the offense and defense and not miss a beat with some of the reserves on the field. So, you think about support staff for Caleb Williams, but, any player on that team, and the fact that they have so many good coaches who are willing to, dedicate themselves to the players and call plays that make sense for the players, fit the scheme to the players, not the other way around, is really promising. It's good to see them taking that next step as a staff. We know what Ben Johnson's supposed to be. We know he's an offensive mastermind and a leader of men and all these cliches, but to see the entire staff top to bottom possess those traits is really promising. So those are my big notes from the Bears game. Great performance from the starting offense. They really stole the show after the defense was a headliner last weekend. Moving on down to the game Monday night, Bengals Commanders. Bengals went on the road. This was not a normal preseason game because we got to see a look at both the starting offenses. So starting with the Bengals, the starters played 3 drives, starting out with a 9-play 50-yard touchdown drive on the opening drive of the game, and then they had a 3-and-out on the second drive, and then the third drive was a 12-play 70-yard touchdown drive to close it out for the starters. So Burrow looked great, 9 for 14, 62 yards, 1 touchdown. Not the offensive explosion we saw week 1 against the Eagles, but still that meticulous take apart the defense and take what they're giving you look from Burrow that makes him one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And Chase Brown, their running back, who finished with 5 carries for 16 yards and their other touchdown with the stars on the board. He's going to be such a big part of running between the tackles because he's got that toughness to him, but he's also able to catch the ball out of the backfield and be a check down. So you can send Jamar Chase and T. Higgins deep and not be worried that if the pressure's coming, you can't check it down to your running back. So I think he's going to be a really big part of the offense. And then on the Commander side of the ball, didn't see a lot of the starting offense. They came out 4-play, 74-yard touchdown drive with a lot of running. Hit a 20-yard end around to Deebo Samuel to get the game going. A 40-yard rush by Chris Rodriguez to really get into Bengals territory. A short run, and then Jaden Daniels capped it off with a 14-yard scramble for a touchdown where he could have gone down. It's the preseason, don't want to take hits, don't want to get hurt, but he made a guy miss and was able to walk into the end zone for the home fans there, so I'm sure that was very exciting for the Commanders faithful. But they pulled him after that. They saw all they needed to see. And the other big Commanders performance, Bill Krosky-Merritt, their 7th-round running back, a 27-yard touchdown on the second drive when the backups were in. So good performance from the Commanders, but especially their run game, just getting that line of scrimmage against the Bengals, who albeit are a weaker defensive line team with Trey Hendrickson out. We'll get to that in a second here, but definitely controlled the line of scrimmage on the offensive side of the ball. And that's what you got to do with the young quarterback. You have a strong run game. Going back to Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels, they're in similar situations where if you can have that strong run game and then do play action bootlegs and deep sets off that, there's just going to be so much more in the deep defensive backfield available if you can run the ball effectively, because it forces safeties to come down, it forces linebackers to come in, it forces one-on-one situations that a good quarterback can take advantage of, and I think we're going to see a lot of that for both those guys, and Daniels especially. We saw that a lot last year. Other big performers from the game in the reserve ranks, a couple Bengals receivers, Mitchell Tinsley, 5 receptions, 73 yards, 2 touchdowns just in the first half alone. Really a really good performance from him. Probably make the roster off that. It's hard. It's a hard lineup to crack in the receiving room, but a player that's earning some looks here. And then similar situation, Charlie Jones, 4 receptions for 32 yards and a touchdown. Continuing to find guys around Burrow when you have a great quarterback. You don't have to draft receivers at the top of the draft. You can get these guys that benefit from having a quarterback like Joe Burrow, and the Bengals seem to have done that. And so those guys are probably in a good position to make that team going forward here. Moving on down to some trade rumors, some trade news involving both those teams primarily. So starting with the Bengals, the Trey Hendrickson saga is ever going. We've talked about it several times on the show, but the Bengals are officially listening to offers on Hendrickson, which is a little bit new. So it's not that they're super far away on a contract. Hendrickson himself has said before, we're close on the numbers, we're close on the years. It's just that guaranteed money that's the hang up. Bengals are a franchise that traditionally doesn't send out big guarantees, and Hendrickson has done a lot in this league already and has proven himself and is not unwarranted to want those guarantees just because you never know what happens in the NFL. That's the big dissonance between the two parties, and it's one that could eventually result in a trade. All things considered, I would say he probably stays with the Bengals, especially as they kind of struggle on the defensive line without him, just proving how important he is. And he's on the sideline of these games just watching the defense get gashed, letting up 20, 30, 40-yard rush plays. He's a pass rusher specialist, but his presence can help in that a lot. But the Bengals put out that in a potential trade, they're looking for high draft picks in the near future and a young defensive player. So a couple of suitors come to mind immediately. Start with the really top-end teams in the NFL. The Lions could desperately use some defensive line help alongside Aiden Hutchinson, who's coming back from an injury and was so dominant before getting hurt last year. But to have another player that you have to game plan against opposite of Hutchinson, like Hendrickson, would be a really impactful way to get the defensive line into that next level where they're just completely game breaking. And the good thing with them is the Lions are so good that you could surrender a first or second round pick knowing that it's going to be at the later end of the draft. You know, they're not going to give a first away and it end up being a top 5 pick, top 10 pick. It'd be late 20s, early 30s, obviously 32 if they win the Super Bowl. So you could let go with some draft capital knowing that it's going to be in the later round anyway. And if you do let up a first round pick, you can maybe package something and get back into the first round if you so need to. But it's not like the Lions really need those picks moving forward to make sure the roster's in a good place. It's already in a good place, and adding a player to help you compete right now could be more important than a late first round pick on the line here. Similar is with the Eagles, obviously one of the best teams in the NFL, won the Super Bowl last year, but they still do have a need at the edge rusher. Right now it's Nolan Smith, who they drafted out of Georgia, and then Jalix Hunt, who's a later round pick that they acquired in recent years. But they lost Josh Sweat in free agency to the Cardinals. They've already pulled off a couple of trades, picking up John Mechie from the Texans and picking up Jacorian Bennett from the Raiders. So they're active in these discussions. Whenever this news becomes public, it means that there was already conversations going on, but now they're trying to leverage that into more meaningful offers. And the Eagles are another team that could surrender a first or second round pick knowing that it's going to be in the back end of that round. So you're not missing a whole lot necessarily, and you have a player who's helping a need right now, could help you get back to the Super Bowl and potentially win again. They're just so good at acquiring good players that it wouldn't be surprising to see Howie Roseman do that again and go and get one of the best edge rushers in the NFL who really fits that timeline of win now, compete now, cause defensive pressure, cause havoc on the defensive line. They still got Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis up front, but adding that edge rusher to come off the edge and force a quarterback to step up into those players in the middle could be a strategy that they don't really have on the team right now. So that could be an interesting spot. Commanders, they just played tonight, but they're still lacking that number 1 DN, obviously trying to overcome the Eagles and adding a defensive end that would have to go against either Lane Johnson or Jordan Mailata in one of those divisional games could be something that would improve that defense a little bit more so that Jay Daniels and the offense doesn't have to do quite as much in terms of outscoring their opponent. Like I said, they don't really have a true number 1 defensive end there, so to get that guy and just have another hallmark piece of that defense and that team in general would be really helpful. They're going through some contract things in their own right, so it might be a little bit down the line. The probably take care of McLaurin first, who we'll get to, but that could be a team. A couple of teams who don't really make sense because they're not really in a win right now phase, more of a rebuilding phase. But the Patriots need an edge rusher. They add Harold Landry in free agency, probably not quite the player that they really want to set the edge there. They're probably going to end up near the top of the draft, so surrendering top-end draft capital could mean giving up a top 50 pick, which is probably not what you want to do when you're trying to surround Drake May with young talent that they can build with. Similar situation with the Panthers and also the Bears, who both could use an edge rusher. Panthers don't really have anybody out there after getting rid of Brian Burns, and the Bears, they have Montez Sweat, and like I said, Austin Booker at the beginning is coming on, but could use another guy opposite. But again, these are teams that might end up at the top of the draft somewhere, so you don't know if you want to give up really top-end draft capital to go get that guy. And the other team that's out there but a little bit unconventional just because of who they are would be the Chiefs. They could use a DN opposite of George Karlaftis, but the Bengals might not be super keen on helping the Chiefs, who they've run into so many different times in the Joe Burrow era. It'd be a shame if it was a postseason matchup, Bengals, Chiefs, and Burrow has Trey Hendrickson rushing at him. That'd be a bad situation to see the Chiefs win with one of the players that you let walk for a draft pick that, again, is going to end up being at the later end of a round just because the Chiefs are so good. So I would say probably one of those top NFC contenders would be the really interesting trade destination, but ultimately I really do think Hendrickson sticks with the Bengals. Moving on down to the Commanders, another team who played last night, actively shopping Brian Robinson Jr., the running back. He's in the final year of his deal. They have so many good running backs already that you can lose one and still have a good handful, because they have Austin Eckler, they have Bill Krosky-Merritt, the 7th rounder, like I said, who's coming into his own. They have Chris Rodriguez, who played well last night. They have Jeremy McNichols. So they have these players that can pick up the slack if they were to get rid of Brian Robinson Jr. So I would think that he probably ends up on a different team. They didn't play him last night amid all the speculation, but a couple teams that could really use a running back start the Bears. DeAndre Swift is a good player. Roschon Johnson injury situation is still unknown. Monangai is good, but an unproven rookie late round pick, and having a downhill player that forces linebackers and forces safeties in would only make it easier for Caleb Williams and co to take the top off of defense. So to have a player like Brian Robinson Jr., who's going to run between the tackles and punch the defense in the mouth, will be very valuable in that effort. You think back to Ben Johnson with the Lions, and they had Dave Montgomery in recent seasons, who's really that downhill player, but they also had Jamal Williams early on there, who had that exceptional year just on the goal line, taking short yards, touchdowns, and Brian Robinson Jr. could potentially serve in a similar role. So the Bears would certainly be an interesting option. I look at the Saints, who have Kamara back there, but he's kind of on the back end of his career. He probably wants to add some longevity to his career, so having a player who can take some carries off of his board here will be helpful, so that he's around for a little bit of the long term as their rebuild kind of gets underway. The 49ers, somewhat similar situation. You have McCaffrey, who's so good, but is a little older, is a little injury prone. You have Isaac Grendo in the backfield there, who I really like coming out of Louisville, but again, not really a downhill player. So you could add Brian Robinson Jr., get that downhill force going so you can do rollouts and play action with Purdy. I look at the Giants. Obviously, they get rid of Saquon Barkley because they're not willing to pay him. You don't have to pay Brian Robinson Jr. that type of money if you extend him. He's in the division, so it might be unlikely, but he's probably a player who can beat out Tyrone Tracy Jr. and Devin Singletary to be that lead back in that running back room and help take some pressure off Russell Wilson and potentially eventually Jackson Dart. Cowboys, another team that's in the division, so it might not make sense, but they could definitely use a running back, and that's on the big glaring weaknesses of the offense. Steelers, they just drafted Caleb Johnson out of Iowa, who's going to become that downhill presence, but their lead back right now, Jalen Warren, doesn't really bring that physicality between the tackles, so he could be a player to kind of some steam off of Aaron Rodgers in the backfield. Dolphins, they drafted Ollie Gordon this year. They have Devon Achane, who's more of a speed threat out of the backfield, so getting a guy like Robinson Jr., who's going to pressure the defense up the middle, could be interesting. And the last one, the Raiders, they drafted Ashton Jeanty this spring. They wanted to get as many carries out of him as possible before they have to pay him, but having a player who can make it so that they're not just running him into the ground over the next 4 years could be helpful. They have Raheem Mostert back there as well as a change of pace back, but another player who's at the back end of his career and could use some help to take some touches away from Jeanty. So any of those teams, I would say the Bears or the Niners make the most sense, just because they're teams that are looking to compete and could buy relatively low on a running back and not feel super pressured into signing him long term. But the interesting takeaway with the Commanders basically shopping Robinson Jr. publicly is that since they're not doing that with McLaurin, that might indicate that they're approaching some sort of agreement with the receiver. He was activated off the PUP list on Saturday. We've been told that that's not related to any contract negotiations, but nonetheless, it feels like we're moving in a direction where McLaurin will be taking the field at some point here. It might not be week one. He's been looking for a new contract for several weeks here, but the fact that they're shopping other players and not him probably tells you that the front office sees him as an untradeable player and that they are looking forward to getting something done, which would make a lot of sense. He's Jaden Daniels' number one threat, has a great rapport with the quarterback on the field and off the field, so getting him long-term with the quarterback makes a lot of sense and something that they'll probably look to do here potentially before the season starts. And then just a little note that we're going to see other players get traded here. It's very common for right before cut-down dates, teams realize that they have to release a player who has value. So instead of just dropping him and not getting anything back, you can send the guy out for a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick. We saw it with the Bears last year. They picked up a DN and a D tackle late in the offseason there for late round picks. So we're going to see that a little bit. There'll be guys that you've heard of before. There'll be some guys that you probably haven't. But backup quarterbacks moving around, offensive skill position players who are just backlogged by good players in front of them could get better opportunities with different teams. Backup linemen, offense or defense have value. Secondary players, linebackers. We're going to see players get traded here in the next week or two. So it's always a fun time, not maybe so much for them, but for fans following the game, just to see how these rosters change pretty quickly in the 2 weeks here before the NFL season officially starts. Moving on down here to some games over the weekend. Not going to do every game here, but there's a couple that stood out to me. Seattle Seahawks beat the Kansas City Chiefs 33-16. Drew Lock, backup quarterback for the Seahawks, played amazing, 10 for 12 for 129 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also had 34 rushing yards and 2 carries. He's a very top-end backup quarterback. Wouldn't be surprised if he got a chance to start at some point in the future. Probably not for Seattle, just because they committed to Sam Darnold and have Jalen Milroe in the back that they want to develop and potentially become that starting quarterback with a little bit more dynamicism than Darnold. But he's a player who could get a look somewhere else, and like I said, it could be a player who's on the move if they feel like they're confident in Milroe and they want to get some value of a backup quarterback. Other player that really stood out for the Seahawks, Gray Zabel, rookie left guard, powerful blocker, cracked down on double teams, reached the second level of linebackers, was able to hold his own in the pass game, reached far defensive linemen on outside zone, and was able to overtake the inside shoulder. So converted a tackle from North Dakota State, playing guard now. He's got that athleticism, he's got that grit, that meanness that you really need to play guard. And I think he's going to be a wonder for that Seahawks interior that's really struggled in recent years. Offensive line in general, but really that interior guard, center guard combination has been a problem for them. And getting Zabel in there to atone for that group is really going to be a difference maker for them. So great early returns on him. Looking at the Chiefs side, Robert Tonyan, 5 receptions for 41 yards, scored their lone off of the touchdown. Travis Kelce and Noah Gray and Tonyan, there's a lot of tight end depth there, but we've seen the Chiefs rely heavily on 12 personnel, 13 personnel even, a lot of tight ends on the field to use as physical mismatches. You know, a slow linebacker or a small defensive back don't really fit. So when you get down to that red zone, to have another big body target for Mahomes is going to be super important, especially as the games get colder and there's more close boxes on the goal lines and in the red zone situation. So good to see them continue with that tight end depth. I mean, they just churn out really good tight ends over there. And then Sky Moore, a reserve receiver who struggled to make his mark on the team. He had an 88-yard punt return touchdown. As I said in a couple episodes ago, special teams in the return game is going to be so important, especially with the new kickoff rules where touchbacks are now the 35-yard line. Seeing him make a difference in that return game is really going to get him on that team and have him make a difference for that roster. So good to see him kicking through. Next game, they got Dolphins 24, Lions 17. Really good performance from the Dolphins backup quarterbacks. Zach Wilson, 15 for 23, 151 yards and a touchdown. And then Quinn Ewers came in 11 for 17, 116 yards and 2 touchdowns. For Ewers, great bounce back from last week. He really struggled, 5 for 18 for 91 yards and took 2 sacks against the Bears, but kept up and showed that pocket presence that we all thought he had coming out of Texas. And that backup quarterback spot is super important with the Dolphins. Tua Tagovailoa has had his injury concerns in the past, and many backup quarterbacks will play throughout the season, but whoever Miami's got back there is definitely a player who has a really high % chance to end up playing a game or two at least throughout the season. So to see Zach Wilson develop and hold his own and potentially win that spot is good. And then to have another young guy like Quinn Ewers who you can mold and bring along over time is also really helpful. And then also on their offense, Ollie Gordon, a late round draft pick at running back, finished with 10 carries for 50 yards. He had some off the field concerns that made him fall a little bit in the draft. He's a super talented player, could end up being that change of pace back that pressures defenses up the middle alongside A-Chain. So good to see him taking those next steps and being really productive against backup defensive players there. Theo Weiss Jr., 6 receptions, 80 yards, 2 touchdowns for the Dolphins there. Really strong performance, adding to that receiver room who's so top end heavy with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, but could really use some more depth add in there to create some different options for Tua. And then on the Lions side, Kyle Allen had a great game as a backup quarterback, another high-end, lot of experience backup quarterback, 14 for 17, 124 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then one of those balls going to Isaac Tesla, their rookie receiver, 4 receptions, 41 yards and a touchdown. Another player who, you know, they have Laporta and they have Amon-Ra St. Brown, but they just need more different players to make an impact on the perimeter. And he's a player who can go in and win. He had a great body control catch in the end zone. He can, you know, if he continues to exhibit that, he's going to have a role in this offense very soon here. Cleveland 22, Philadelphia 13. We got to see Dylan Gabriel start. He missed the last game with an injury. Started off 13 for 18 for 143 yards and a pick. Played pretty well. We all kind of story on him, saw a lot of him in college. You know, a conservative quarterback who's going to be able to make things work within the scheme. He had that kind of pocket quote where he said, you know, I'm here to compete, not to entertain. It sounded like it might have been a slight at Shedeur Sanders. It turns out it's probably more of a comment about the media and their role in stoking this fire amongst the quarterbacks and just the constant coverage of that quarterback competition. We did learn following the game that the Browns plan on starting Joe Flacco week 1. That's not a huge surprise. He's the veteran. He's seen so much football in his life. He's played so much football. To get him to start the season off strong and then filter in these younger guys makes a lot of sense. And then from the Eagles side of it, just looking at their defense a little bit, Jahad Campbell, their first round pick, 4 tackles and a sack, and then their second pick, Andrew Makuba, a tackle, a pass deflection, a 75-yard pick 6, and then a fumble recovery, just making his name known. Both those players were the top 2 picks by the Eagles. To see them get immediate production out of those guys just proves the point that when you have a roster like the Eagles, it doesn't have a lot of holes in it. You can just be the best player available and stockpile good players that might not start right away, but if you lose a guy to free agency or injury or what have you, you can have a guy step in and really not miss a beat. So the only other thing from that game, there was a funny moment where Sirianni iced the Browns right before the end of the first half, called a timeout as they were kicking a field goal. He had a good chuckle with Kevin Stefanski, the Browns head coach. That was good to see. And then last game here, the New York showdown, Giants win 31-12 over the Jets. Another really strong performance from Jackson Dart, their rookie quarterback, 14 for 16, 137 yards and a touchdown. Also tacked on a rushing touchdown on 2 attempts with 5 yards. Led 2 touchdown drives. Seems to have a great grasp of what Daboll expects out of him. Obviously not playing against top-end defensive talent, but for him to play within himself and get the ball to players and just take what the defense is giving you and, you know, competing at a high level in the preseason, I think is very reassuring for them. Russell Wilson started the game off, didn't play as great, 4 for 7, 108 yards and an interception. Had a great 80-yard bomb to Bo Collins to set them up at the 1-yard line, so they scored. Not a bad performance by him at all, but we're kind of seeing how this is going to go, where Russell Wilson is going to start out and they're just going to bring Jackson Dart along, build up his confidence in the practice field, and then whenever they feel ready, get him out there and see if they can convert some good reps in the preseason and practice and everything into production in the NFL regular season. So you have to be really happy with what you're seeing out of the quarterback room for Daboll and the Giants. Looking at the Jets side of it, Fields struggled a little bit, 1 for 5 for 4 yards, had a rush for 5 yards. Really nothing of note production-wise. Really talented athlete, but needs to get a little better at that quarterbacking aspect of being behind center. Take what the defense is giving you, be accurate in your delivery, be quick and decisive in your delivery. But we did see a lot of great stuff out of that backfield, especially Braylon Allen. They're a young power running back, 7 carries for 34 yards. You got Breece Hall back there. You got Fields, who's going to take some attention from the defense. But to have a player like Allen, who just smash you in the face, run downhill, is going to be very helpful behind that good offensive line. Take some pressure off Fields, create one-on-one situations for Garrett Wilson and Mason Taylor and whoever else kind of steps up as that wide receiver to Allen Lazard, Malachi Corley, whoever it is. But to have a player like that who's so dependable and so physical downhill is going to be very helpful for them. So that's all I have from the NFL weekend. Moving on down to the Cubs here. So they were set to play a doubleheader on Monday. They lost that first game 7-0. Pretty tough showing. Scoreboard ended up being a little bit worse than it actually was. Cade Horton started the game for the Cubs. 4 hits and 1 solo homer. A little less than 3 innings. But had to leave the game for a blister. Then the wheels came off. They were down 3-0 heading into the 8th, allowed 4 runs. They had bases loaded several different times. On defense, on offense, they had the bases loaded and couldn't put anybody in. They had 2 hits all game. Like I said, bases loaded with 1 out in the 4th, but Casey struck out swinging, reaching for a ball, and then Nico Horner had a fly out to end the inning. So to get people on base and to just not bring anybody home was certainly disappointing, and then momentum just surmounted, and it was impossible for them to come back, especially after they put up a 4-run inning. So Cubs find themselves now 9 games back at the Brewers. They haven't been terrible since the All-Star break. 13-15 is pretty much middle of the pack across the MLB, but Milwaukee has just been on a tear, 23-5 since the break. 6 more wins than the second best team, which I believe are the Guardians and the Padres. So they're on a tear. Like I said, they're supposed to be a back-to-back last night. Ended up getting rained out that second game. So Tuesday, they moved up a game at 1, and now they're playing a doubleheader on Tuesday. It's still 5 games over 4 days. Dropped the first one. Still time to make it up in this series, and even it out, potentially take a game, but still seems like the NL Central title is out of the Cubs' grasp, and they're more in that wild card pocket, which is not a bad place to be because you just need to heat up and everything will be different. But the big news coming out of the game was just Kyle Tucker struggling more. Went 0 for 4. The team announced they're going to, give him some significant rest here and let him reset mentally. So homers, he hasn't hit a homer since July 19th. Just has 4 extra base hits since July 1st. He really needs that mental rest just to reset and try to find his swing a little bit. So he's probably not going to see the field the rest of this Brewers series. We don't know when he'll be back with the team, but potentially that next series. Positive is it should open up a spot for Owen Casey, probably out in right field, that corner field. Not really a center fielder, so maybe left field and Happ goes to right, but probably right field in for Tucker, which might end up being what this defense looks like next year at this time. Or you could have Suzuki go back in the outfield and have Casey DH, but no matter how it shakes out, we're not going to see Kyle Tucker for a little bit as he tries to reset and get his mojo back a little bit. Not much to say about the Cubs that hasn't already been said. They're not bad. They showed up so strong in the first half of the season that this descent to mediocrity seems stunning, but it's really nothing crazy. There are a couple of swings of the bat from really being in that game against the best team in baseball right now. The pitching has been pretty solid. Horton played well. Had to leave to prevent long-term discomfort and injury. Definitely unfortunate way to start the series, but a lot of time throughout the rest of the week to make some of those games up and get back into some positive vibes going into the end of the season here. Moving on down here to our media review, I watched the new revival season of The King of the Hill, so the 14th season of the show. 10 episode drop on Hulu. The show was canceled back in 2008, actually for the Cleveland show on Fox, which we talked about a couple weeks ago. And basically the premise, we left the hills and we come back to them several years later. A bunch of the kid characters like Bobby, Connie, Joseph are aged up in their early 20s, and then Hank Hill and Peggy, they went to Saudi Arabia for a little bit and have moved back to Arlington, Texas, but are retired and are kind of different phase of their life without Bobby around. And Bobby is now a partial owner of a Japanese-German fusion chain where he works as the head cook, and isn't going to school, is kind of his own thing, and is getting through adult life a little bit. I thought it was really good. I'm a big King of the Hill fan. I like some of the really early stuff especially. I was a little disappointed that it was just a 10 episode release. I could have used double that. It's just more to kind of sink my teeth into. But I thought they did a really good job with the commented run. I had good references to the past elements of the show. Peggy's talking about a groin injury which stems from Bobby kicking her, which was a big joke where he's in a female self-defense class. A lot of good callbacks to like Dale's conspiracy theories. A lot of good callbacks to the Dale John Redcorn situation where John Redcorn's having an affair with Dale's wife and he just can't see it despite being in on every other conspiracy theory. A lot of good callbacks to Bill and Boomhauer and how they were in the old show. Good callbacks to some of the characters that Bobby grew up with. Like I said, Connie, who's love interest now, and Joseph, who is his good friend and now roommate now that they're adults. But one of the big complaints I had was, and this is kind of a stupid thing to complain about, was just that the animation was a little too clean and new. I thought one of the really charming parts of the first run of the show was that the animation was so grainy and low quality that it matched the vibe and attitude coming out of Arlington, Texas. So to see it be high res took me out of it for a little bit. Lost some of that homeliness of the first couple seasons there. A couple changes to the voice cast. On the sad side of it, Johnny Hardwick, who voiced Dale Gribble, passed away as they were taping this season. So he was replaced by Jonathan Huss for parts of the season. He unfortunately died in a drowning incident, which is super sad. And then Jonathan Joss, the voice actor for John Redcorn, was able to voice this season, but he was murdered in a hate crime after he recorded his lines. So if they do another season, that's a voice that's going to be changed. But another super sad situation where a man was murdered basically on the grounds of his race and sexual orientation, which is just a very sad thing to happen at this stage in time, supposedly advanced year 2025. So super sad situation. And then on a not so depressing note, the voice actor for Cons was changed. He was Toby Huss, a white dude, and now there's pushed to have minority characters voiced by minority actors, which I think makes a lot of sense. It's hard to profit off of a character and then not use a person of similar ethnic background to voice that character. So he's now voiced by Ronnie Chang, very funny stand-up comic, has been on Jon Stewart's show, I believe, as an alternate host. Really funny guy. An immigrant, definitely makes sense to have him in there and the voice an Asian American character like Khan. But overall, definitely sad to see a couple of those actors pass and the situation surrounding that. But I definitely liked the show. It was a good callback and did a lot of good service to the original show. I'm going to give it a 7.2 out of 10. Like I said, a couple of places where they could have improved. If anything, just wish it could have been a little longer. Potentially could have wished that the animation quality was worse, which I know, again, is a crazy complaint, but definitely a good watch and a quick thing to kind of knock out over a weekend. So that's it for me. I'm happy to get through that media review. Like I said on a previous show, probably not going to do a whole lot more, though, as football season camps up here. We got week 0 of college football happening this weekend. We're right there. Like I said earlier, if you have any suggestions on what to talk about, what you'd like to hear, please drop a comment. I will definitely get to it. And thanks so much for watching. See you guys on Friday. Peace.